Hello, BookTube. David Wiley and I have been doing an impromptu read-along of J.R.R. Tolkien's The Two Towers. We decided to skip The Fellowship of the Ring, so I went straight to my old Ballantine trade paperback of The Two Towers with my Lord of the Rings bookmark that has there's Frodo, but there's also the One Ring is part of the bookmark, which is kind of neat. It's engraved and everything. Uh, we've been reading The Two Towers, which continues the story of the Fellowship of the Ring, but we just decided to jump in cold. And I'm glad we did because it's really shown me the book in new ways. I've never quite done this before. I've dipped back into the Two Towers in order to read some favorite chapter or some favorite bit, but not just to read it as a book. That's been tremendously enjoyable. In this book, we follow the adventures of a group of heroes who are sent out on an impossible quest. Uh, the land of Middle-earth is besieged by a supernatural being called Sauron, the Dark Lord. And ages ago, he constructed a ring, the One Ring, that was intended to give him control over the great rings of all the other races of Middle-earth, the dwarfs, men, and especially the three great rings of the elves. And the elves and men banded together all those ages ago and fought him and won a temporary victory. They defeated him and they took the ring, but it quickly betrayed them and went missing for thousands of years. This is the ring that those of you who have not read The Lord of the Rings, this is the ring that Bilbo Baggins finds in The Hobbit. And it's decided among the great and the wise that it must be brought back to Mordor, to Sauron's kingdom, in order to be destroyed in the molten pits of Mount Doom where he originally forged it. That's the only power on Earth, on Middle-earth, that can destroy it. So they select a group of people. There's the wizard Gandalf. There's Aragorn, who is the many generations removed heir to the throne of Gondor, the kingdom that is fighting Mordor in the south. There's Boromir, who is the son of the steward of Gondor. The current steward of Gondor is not the king. He is waiting for the king. Boromir is a proud and able man who has not come to seek help, and yet Gondor needs help. And they are joined by an elf named Legolas, a dwarf named Gimli, and four hobbits, little people from the extreme west of Middle-earth. There's Merry and Pippin, two young hobbits who go along on the quest only because they say they won't be left behind. They can't actually materially contribute anything. They are our everyman characters. They are everyman stand-ins. And there's also Frodo, who is the ring bearer. He is the one carrying the One Ring, and his servant Sam. They set out, and their fellowship is knocked all to pieces pretty quickly. For instance, Gandalf appears to die in combat with a creature named Balrog. But he gets better. He gets better, and is a main character throughout the rest of the book. But Boromir does die. He tries to take the ring from Frodo by force, outwardly saying that he wants to use it for good. That if it's this powerful a thing, if it has so much of Sauron's power invested in it, why can't we use it to defeat him? We are desperate. Why can't we use it? Of course, readers of the book know what the wise and powerful have been saying all along, which is that that's not how this ring works. It will corrupt you. It is thoroughly evil. It will either turn you into an evil version of the Dark Lord, or it will turn you into his slave. But either way, you can't use it. And Frodo flees from Boromir, and he and Sam head out on their quest to Mordor alone. They don't want to endanger their friends anymore. They don't want to suborn their friends anymore, so they go off alone. And at the same time, Merry and Pippin are abducted by a band of orcs, and that band of orcs kills Boromir. And there follows the story of the Two Towers as we have seen it so far, which is one chapter after another in which characters meet somebody, exchange a bunch of information, and then end the chapter by saying, off we go. As they just head off in some other direction. It's not just in the Two Towers that the plot moves forward at the end of every chapter. It's that the characters move forward physically at the end of almost every chapter. Legolas and Aragorn and Gimli chase after that orc band to save Merry and Pippin. Merry and Pippin don't need saving because they meet Treebeard and the Ents, creatures that live in the deep forests of Middle-earth that are so old and have been so long removed from the normal everyday world that most people, even the elves, consider them to be quasi-mythical. Legolas, the elf that's in our cast, is many, many hundreds of years old and has never dreamed that he would ever meet an Ent. Gandalf is old too, and he knows that the Ents are real. He just doesn't, I guess, ever bother to talk about it with anybody. He doesn't ever bother to take anybody, like, in idle conversation, Aragorn or anybody else aside and say, oh, and by the way, the Ents in your fairy tales are real. They live in Fanghorn Forest. He doesn't bother to do that until, he's not surprised, though, that they are alive. They know him and he knows them. Uh, and another meeting that we have is with King Denethor, who is the king of the kingdom of Rohan, which is also at war. There are, it looks like two theaters of one war going on, but in the Two Towers it becomes quickly obvious that it's really two wars that are going on. Because Rohan is at war with Isengard, the kingdom, the fortress, the stronghold of another wizard, another member of Gandalf's order, Saruman, who, in addition, again, like Sauron, in addition to being a supernatural being, also is a military figure. He has a gigantic army and armories and forges and whatnot, and wants to wear down Rohan in war. In addition to wearing down Rohan from within, he suborns one of King Theoden's advisors, Grima Wormtongue, to constantly gnaw away at his self-confidence until Gandalf shows up and restores it. And they go off to war. And as we've seen in the last few chapters, that war is right on the knife's edge when the Ents save the day. They save Theoden's bacon. They save the encounter at Helm's Deep from turning into a rout, and they destroy Saruman's army. And they also destroy Isengard. His headquarters is a heavily fortified ring of armaments and walls and weapons and whatnot. But Saruman has sent his army out to destroy Rohan. He isn't expecting the Ents to come calling at his home. And when they do, they destroy everything. The central tower of Orthanc, in the middle of Isengard, they can't destroy. It was made by far greater craft in ancient days. So the Ents, even with all their physical power, can't destroy it. But they can trap Saruman inside, and they do. We saw that in the last chapter. Saruman is called out to his porch to talk with the people who now surround his fortress. He knows that all of his hopes are lost. Gandalf lays out the situation as bleakly as it could be. You have made your neighbors into your enemies. You have betrayed your trust. And you have betrayed or tried to betray your master, Sauron. When he turns his eye towards Orthanc, it will be the red eye of wrath. Because Saruman has been trying to take the ring for himself. He has been in league with Sauron. Somehow, he has been in league with Sauron, and they have somehow been coordinating with each other. Gandalf and all the rest of our heroes are not quite sure how, but it's obvious that in addition to being in league with Sauron, Saruman has started to have ideas of his own. I'll build my own army, and maybe I'll find the ring on my own. If a wizard as powerful as Saruman were to find the Ring of Power, that would be a very bad thing for everyone involved. It might be extremely bad news for Sauron, because the more powerful you are when you put the ring on, the more powerful it makes you. It's possible that Saruman would not have become a slave of Sauron, but rather another Dark Lord. I myself don't think so. I think it's pretty clear that the ring dominates, that the ring is an enhancement of Sauron's domination, not just an independent thing from him. And I think we see that pretty clearly in the chapter that we're reading today, the Palantir. Because at the end of that parley, when Saruman is scornful and turns down all conditions, Gandalf even offers him a chance to come out of Orthanc and join the good guys, which you'd think he would long since have not merited anymore. But Gandalf offers it to him anyway, and he turns him down and storms away. And at the same time, someone else, it's Grima Wormtongue, who is in Orthanc as well, hurls a mysterious object down at our heroes, or maybe at Saruman. Maybe he hurls it at Saruman and just misses. And one of the two hobbits, Pippin, runs over and plucks up that object, not knowing what it is. No one knows what it is. And Gandalf is concerned with Saruman. He is busy with just finishing up their talk. But then he realizes, oh, wait, that you've picked up this thing here. You should never have touched that. I didn't ask you to do that. Let me take that. And he doesn't say anything more about it. He knows that if it came from inside of Orthanc, it might be very old and very dangerous. It might be mysterious even to him. So he takes it from Pippin, and they decide to march off. Away we go. They decide to march off from ruined Isengard, leaving it in the control of the Ents. And then we pick up with this chapter, where our heroes, now keep in mind, this is all of the Fellowship, except Boromir, who's dead, and except Frodo and Sam, who are off on their mission into Mordor. Aside from that, it's everybody. It's Legolas and Gimli and Aragorn. It's Merry and Pippin and Gandalf. It's the whole of the Fellowship. It's the most of the Fellowship together that we're ever going to see until the end of the book. Uh, they're all old friends by now. They've been through a lot together, good and bad, and they all head off. Uh, but Gandalf is wondering about this thing. What was this thing that was flung out of Orthanc? He originally guesses that it's just possible that of all the things that Saruman would not have wanted someone to throw out a window instead of keeping in Orthanc, this thing is probably most precious of all. But he's not 100% sure. But he wants to hold on to it. He certainly doesn't want Pippin or anyone else holding on to it. And our party marches out, and they camp down for the night to sleep. When I first read this eons ago, I was actually wondering about that. I was thinking, okay, this is all well and good, all these chapters where people meet and then they talk and then off we go. But the thing you're leaving out there is sleep. And how many of these characters can go forever without sleeping is what I'm curious about. It's a thing that I'm acutely aware of just in my own life, because I'm constantly waiting for each one of you to get tired and start dropping off at the end of every day with all this sleep that you need. But our company beds down for the night, but Pippin is restless. He has a brief conversation with Merry. Merry just wants to go to sleep. Merry is dead tired and wants to just go to sleep. They have a brief conversation that sparks on their speculation about whether or not this new Gandalf, the one who has seemingly returned from the dead, is the same or different than the old Gandalf. And Merry very much says, yeah, he is very different. He's more extreme in both directions. He's quicker to wrath and quicker to happiness. There's more to him. I don't think we've seen how much more there is, but there's clearly more to him. But Pippin doesn't care because his mind has been ensnared by this thing. And eventually it's too much for him. In the middle of the night, he decides to sneak over to where Gandalf has it. Gandalf appears to be asleep. And Pippin takes the thing, which is a smooth stone. It's a smooth globe, a little globe of appearing smooth stone or glass that's dark. He takes it and he puts a rock of similar size under Gandalf's cloaks, just so that he won't be surprised or might be lulled, and give him a little bit longer with it. He takes it off and looks into it. And a minute later, or an undisclosed length of time later, he gives out a hoarse cry. Everyone notices. The sentries leap from their posts. Everyone wakes up and rushes over to him. And Gandalf sees immediately what has happened and immediately guesses what this thing is. And it is a Palantir. It is one of the 7 seeing stones that was taken out of the wreck of Numenor by Elendil, the heir of the long time ago ancestor of Aragorn. Now, in Season 2 or Season 3 of Amazon's The Rings of Power, you are going to learn that all 7 of the Palantir were created by Galadriel, and she's the one who saved them personally from the wreck of Numenor, and she is the only one who can use them responsibly, her and other women, but that men are genetically too weak to use it. In the Season 2 or Season 3 of Rings of Power, we're going to learn that. But in The Lord of the Rings, no. In The Lord of the Rings, Galadriel never went to Numenor, and was not Supergirl from the planet Krypton. And this was probably made by Fëanor, or one of the great Noldor in the old days of Eldamar, a long, long time ago, so that the faintest memory of it is preserved in ditties and folklore, which Gandalf knows, but now he knows what this thing is. He knows that, and he knows also, since he knows what it is, the Palantir were creations of the old world that allowed people to communicate over great distances. The seeing stones could turn to any place that the will of the bearer could make them go, in the present, in the past, across great distances, in order to convey information, in order to convey messages. Think of it as kind of a cell phone. And Gandalf quickly discerns that what happened is that one of those things must have been in Orthanc all along. Orthanc is that old. It is that powerful. One of those things must have been in Orthanc all along, and Saruman must have started using it, not only to understand all that was going on all around him, to know so much more than he should have been able to know, even with birds as his spies, but also he looked further and further and further until he found another seeing stone in Mordor, Sauron's Palantir. and was, as Gandalf puts it, ensnared. That's what leads me to believe that even if Saruman had got the One Ring, it wouldn't have made any difference. He would have become a servant of Sauron rather than anything else, because it's clear that his will is daunted. He is clearly an unwilling but very much a broken servant of Sauron, because of their connection with the Palantir. And Pippin is traumatized. He has been seen by Sauron directly, and he remembers the comments that the unblinking eye of Mordor says to him, because Sauron doesn't know any more than this. He's not omniscient. He can't see what's happening with our heroes. The most that he can see about Orthanc, he can see through this stone. And he sees that a hobbit is being forced to look into the stone, much to his dismay. It's torture. Pippin describes it as being struck with knives. Pippin doesn't identify himself at first. He's clearly not going to be able to last if this figure at the other end of the phone starts interrogating him. But the figure isn't interested in interrogating him. Instead, he gives him a message. He figures out, okay, who are you? His first comment is, why has it been so long since you reported in? Angry comments directed at a subordinate, an unruly subordinate, clearly meant for Saruman. Then he sees that it's not Saruman using the stone. It's someone else. And he asks, who are you? And then he gives Pippin a message. Tell Saruman this dainty is not for him. Meaning you, meaning this hobbit, is not for him. I will send someone immediately. Now, Sauron either means the hobbit, or he means the Palantir, or he means both. But it's likely that he means Pippin, that he means the hobbit. I will send someone right away. And Pippin sees a horrifying glimpse of what that someone will be, which is Nazgul, the 9 mortal men who were subsumed by Sauron because of their great rings, and now are his most deadly servants, only mounted on a great winged beast that can fly through the air. Pippin sees that clear as day, and that is the thing that will be sent from Mordor to Isengard, about 200 leagues, so a couple of hours of flight at top speed for a winged Nazgul, which leads Gandalf to believe that we're all in great peril. As fast as we've been moving, we haven't been moving fast enough. Things are now going to be critical, and we cannot dally. We cannot delay. This is borne out almost immediately in the chapter when a gigantic winged figure is seen high over the air, and Gandalf gives the instructions basically that amount to panic. I want to stress that. Let's see here. At that moment, a shadow fell over them. The bright moonlight seemed to be suddenly cut off. Several of the riders cried out and crouched, holding their arms above their heads as if to ward off a blow from above. A blind fear and a deadly cold fell upon them. Cowering, they looked up. A vast winged shape passed over the moon like a black cloud. It wheeled and went north, flying at a speed greater than any wind of Middle-earth. The stars fainted before it. It was gone. They stood up, rigid as stones. Gandalf was gazing up, his arms out and downwards, stiff, his hands clenched. Nazgul, he cried. The messenger of Mordor. The storm is coming. The Nazgul have crossed the river. Ride, ride. Wait not for the dawn. Let not the swift wait for the slow. Ride. I want to stress that we're talking about a military group here. The king is leading an armed group of soldiers. This is not an excursion of civilians. This is an armed group of soldiers who have ranks and arms and whatnot. And the order, let not the fleet wait for the slow, is an order to panic. That's not how military movements work. It's really bad advice, and it's urgent advice. Gandalf figures out that this must be how Isengard and Mordor communicated, through the Palantir, and they now have one. An extremely perilous thing. Gandalf points out that if Sauron had been more concerned with interrogating Pippin than giving orders to acquire him, Pippin would have told him everything. He wouldn't have had a defense. He wouldn't have had a way not to. And who knows what Sauron might eventually learn from Saruman. Saruman saw Gandalf alive. He saw him changed. He saw him in the company of hobbits. He saw the heir of Elendil. He saw the heir of Gondor, Aragorn. Now, Aragorn was wearing armor from Rohan. Saruman might have recognized him. And Sauron will know all those things. This will drastically increase Sauron's own war making at Gondor. That's where the first hammer blow will fall. So the introduction of the Palantir speeds up all of the events. And Gandalf thinks it's best if Pippin isn't anywhere near the Palantir. He bestows the Palantir to Aragorn. He entrusts it with him. It is, after all, technically speaking, Aragorn's property. Uh, he bestows it on him, and then he takes Pippin, and they ride off down to Minas Tirith. They ride off into the very jaws of the attack of the enemy on Shadowfax, Gandalf's great steed, and so at enormous speed. That's actually how the chapter ends. It ends with an evocation of that speed. Shadowfax tossed his head and cried aloud as if a trumpet had summoned him to battle. Then he sprang forward. Fire flew from his feet. Night rushed over him. As he fell slowly into sleep, Pippin had a strange feeling. He and Gandalf were still as stone, seated upon a statue of a running horse, while the world rolled away beneath his feet with a great noise of wind. So they are headed away. So once again we see, believe it or not, that our old pattern holds true, where characters meet and talk. In this case, the meeting is that Pippin meets Sauron. This is one of the very few times that we actually get any direct contact or portrayal of the character who is the Lord of the Rings, who is the title character of the book. It only happens twice in the whole of the book. This is one of them, where we get a direct echo, a direct account of Sauron's voice, of what it is how it is that he actually thinks, or how it is that he actually talks, what it is that he actually wants, and how that happens. I have to say, in both cases where we get this, he doesn't seem all that otherworldly. He seems kind of like an evil version of a man. But Gandalf considers that although Pippin was foolish, he knew that what he was doing was wrong. Although he was foolish to take a gamble and hold this object, this Palantir, and look into it, Gandalf considers it a stroke of luck, because he didn't know what it was. He didn't know that it was a Palantir, and was curious about what this device was for. He tells us that he was kind of thinking about probing it himself. He says, but at this time we have been strangely fortunate. Maybe I have been saved by this hobbit from a grave blunder. I had considered whether or not to probe this stone myself to find its uses. Had I done so, I should have been revealed to him, that Sauron, myself. I am not ready for such a trial, if indeed I ever shall be so. But even if I found the power to withdraw myself, it would be disastrous for him to see me, yet, until the hour comes when secrecy will no longer avail. And Aragorn says, that hour is now come, I think. And Gandalf says, not yet. There remains a short while of doubt, which we must use. The enemy, it is clear, thought that the stone was in Orthanc. Why should he not? And that therefore the hobbit was captive there, driven to look in the glass for his torment by Saruman. That dark mind will be filled now with the voice and face of the hobbit, and with expectation. It may take some time before he learns his error. We must snatch that time. We have been too leisurely. We must move. The area of Isengard is no place now to linger in. I will ride ahead at once with Peregrine Took. It will be better for him than lying in the dark while others sleep. In other words, Sauron doesn't know what has happened. He doesn't know about the Ents. He doesn't know about the destruction of Isengard. No one's told him that. He still thinks that all is well, that Saruman is, a faithful servant out there in the wilderness, helping him to gather both news of the ring and also halflings for nefarious use back in Barad-dûr. And that is the way the chapter ends. That passage that I just read you raises a question in me. I've always had a question about that I really don't understand. Now, I've mentioned a few times that Tolkien likes soft magic systems. He likes to work in a good deal of obscurity into what he's writing, which is kind of interesting. Little turns of phrase here and there that are supposed to be little kernels of puzzlement. Like, for instance, when Gandalf is telling Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli about his experience with the Balrog, he mentions that when they were fighting, they grappled their way all the way down to the very bottom of the world, to the roots of the world, where nameless things gnaw in the shadows. And Gandalf has now seen those things, but he'll bring back no report of them to the light of day. He mentions specifically that they don't care about Sauron. They're older than he is, which raises a lot of questions, right? There shouldn't be anything in Middle Earth that's older than Sauron. Uh, that kind of poetic phraseology, I think, I love it. I absolutely love it. But every once in a while, I wonder if it isn't just a mistake. If that kind of poetic obscurity doesn't lead Tolkien into simply making a mistake. And I wonder if that bit that Tolkien says about, I'm not ready for that trial. I don't want Sauron to see me. I don't know that I'll ever be ready for that trial. I wonder if that isn't one of those mistakes. I'm wondering if any of you think the same thing or what you think of it. Because when Gandalf returns, seemingly from the dead after fighting the Balrog, he mentions that in order to give Frodo a chance, it briefly looks to him from a distance as though the eye of Sauron is turning in Frodo's direction. The absolute key to all hope in Lord of the Rings is that Sauron not know his peril. If he knew that two unarmed hobbits were walking the ring into his kingdom in order to destroy it, they would have no chance of getting through. They would have no chance of reaching the Black Gate. They would have no chance of reaching Mount Doom. He has enormous forces at his disposal. The whole key is that he not suspect anything of the kind. The whole key is that he assume that the One Ring is in possession of these great captains of the West, and maybe they'll end up fighting over it. Briefly, in the beginning of the Two Towers, Gandalf seems to sense that Sauron's eye might be accidentally turning in Frodo's direction and might accidentally see him and know his peril. And to distract him, we're told, Gandalf tells us, that he strove with the Dark Tower. And that it wearied him so much that when he saw Treebeard later, he was too tired to even say hello. He was weary from his contest with the Dark Tower. And I have noted that in the past as a demonstration that the Gandalf who returns from the dead, who returns until his task is done, is more powerful than Gandalf the Grey. Gandalf the Grey could not have done that. Gandalf the White appears to be able to contend directly with the will of Sauron from a great distance, sorcerously, over a great distance. It can't mean anything else, because Gandalf doesn't go to Barad-dûr. He doesn't go to Mordor. It has to be that they contested with each other, that he contested with the Eye of Sauron sorcerously, over a great distance, telepathically, I guess you could say, if this were science fiction. And that happens earlier in this section of the book. So what are we supposed to make about that, the thing that's in this chapter? That Gandalf is saying, well, I wouldn't want to use, I'm glad I didn't use the Palantir, because then Sauron would know me, he would have known that I exist, and I'm not ready for that trial. Haven't you already gone through that trial? You, the resurrected Gandalf, Gandalf the White, haven't you already striven with the Dark Tower? There's nobody else in the Dark Tower who's going to strive with you. You weren't striving with the Nazgul, you were striving with Sauron. Didn't he already do that? Isn't that simply a mistake? Not nitpicking. I love the book anyway. I love everything about it. I love even that moment. But I don't think those two things go together. Fans always talk about what seems to be a flat-out contradiction in the Two Towers, contradicting the Fellowship of the Ring. In the Fellowship of the Ring, Tom Bombadil says that he is the oldest of all things, the oldest thing in Middle-earth. Remembers the first acorn, remembers the world before the seas were bent. In the Two Towers, we are flatly told that Treebeard, the Ent, is the oldest living thing still walking under the sun on Middle-earth. That seems to be just a flat-out contradiction and has led to a million fan theories. A million of the easiest one being that Tom Bombadil is not a living being, that he is a god of some kind. But that, at least there's wiggle room. This doesn't seem to me to be wiggle room. It seems like this is just a mistake. Sauron must already know about Gandalf. To some extent, he must already, or Gandalf could not have striven with him. How do you do that otherwise? Throw rocks at his window? But anyway, it doesn't matter, because it's wonderful anyway. And we see here that the off we go moment is that all of our other characters are headed to war, and so are Gandalf and Pippin. They have split off. They will go somewhere else at much greater speed. And so when you finish this chapter, your first impulse is to think, okay, well, we've been down this road before, right? In the Two Towers, we've been down this road before. We have seen parallel narratives. Merry and Pippin get captured. Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli chase them. We get a few chapters of that. Then we shift the narrative to Merry and Pippin so that we can see what their captivity is like in that band of orcs. Then we shift back to Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli and eventually those two parallel plot lines meet up again. We saw that charming moment where our friends are all together, eating and drinking and talking and sharing notes, figuring out what the whole story is up until this point. So you finish this chapter, the Palantir, with the world rolling by as Shadowfax runs at a speed that no other horse in Middle Earth can match. We finish this chapter and think, okay, well, whole bunch of opportunities for the next chapter. This ends this particular book of Lord of the Rings. We're moving on to the next segment, which is called a book. It's a little bit confusing. The Lord of the Rings is intended as one book, one whole book that is separated into huge sections. David and I are doing the reading Lord of the Rings, specifically broken up along that way for the month of February. But you've seen that before, so if you're reading this for the first time, you're thinking, well, all sorts of possibilities. Will the next chapter be Gandalf and Pippin making their way at lightning speed all the way to Minas Tirith, or will we shift to Theoden and Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli? What adventures will they have on their own road? And if you're reading this for the first time, you're going to encounter the last thing that you expect, because the next book of the Two Towers, the next part of the Two Towers, is neither of those things. Both of those are natural narrative threads. We are invested now, right? We are absolutely invested. We are interested. We have seen these characters through all kinds of hardships. We want to know what's going to happen next. Absolutely, we do. We're also accustomed to the register that Tolkien has struck: high epic fantasy, great battles, sorcerous turns of events, sorcerous new beings, all kinds of things like that. We've had chapter after chapter after chapter of high adventure like that. And in the next book of the Two Towers, Tolkien chucks all of that aside. A narrative gambit that is either foolhardy or a mark of unbelievable storytelling confidence. And we will move on to that in the next video. we will see what we make of it. I have typically not liked it at all, but I have not read The Two Towers like this before, separately as a book. I have not done that. The Two Towers is two books. It's half of one and half of another. And they are drastically different. And they don't connect with each other. So they're drastically different. What the readers who got accustomed to the first 200 pages of this book now have to shift gears completely. And I've always had a problem doing that. I'm wondering, I'm intentionally going slow here, so I'm wondering if I'll have a problem with that this time. I will report back. We will see what we will see in the next chapter. So I'll wrap this up for now. I will see you then. Thank you, BookTube.